Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started since we're a few minutes after noon, and I think there are a few more people coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover today. So thank you all so much for coming. My name is Angie Wagenhals. I'm the Director of Pro Bono at Montana Legal Services Association. This is the last in a series of CLEs that we've been doing to encourage emeritus attorney participation and to just do some general continuing legal educations on the types of issues that we see at legal services and need assistance with. So thank you all for coming over your lunch hour. There are a few housekeeping things that we need to cover. If you are attending in person, we have asked that you sign in at the door, and MLSA will report your attendance to the state bar. For CLE Credit, I would give them a few days to post that, but you should see that here pretty quickly. If you're watching the stream, please email my colleague Catherine Hartfield. Their email is khartfie@mtlsa.org with your name and bar number. And that contact information is in the CLE announcement as well. Additionally, if you have any questions, you can email that email, or my email is wagenha@mtlsa.org. Sorry, neither of us are a Smith or a Jones, which would just make life a lot easier. So we will report your attendance. We do encourage you to ask questions as they come up, and we'll save some time at the end. If you're in the room, please raise your hand. I'll run the mic over to you because the people attending virtually can't hear the question, so we'll either need to repeat it or have you speak into the microphone. If you're attending virtually, please email those questions, and we will raise them as we can. Before we dive right in, I do want to take a brief minute to explain why we're focusing on public benefits. Because when most people think of civil legal aid, and maybe this is not true for those of you attending today, but they often don't include public benefits in their thoughts on that. However, public benefits like SNAP, TANF, LEAP, and Medicaid are essential in ensuring economic stability for people living in poverty. Public benefits make it possible for parents to put food on the table for their families, to keep the heat and lights on over the winter, and to ensure that their kids can go to the doctor when they're sick. However, these benefits are not easily gained and are not necessarily easy to keep. The paperwork is pretty daunting, and it's not uncommon for people to be denied several times before they're successful in their application. People on public benefits have to remember to report any changes in income or their living situation, or they may risk some fines and fees. And it's a lot for anyone to manage, and it's even more daunting to do when you've got other demands on your time, like raising a family or trying to make enough money to pay your rent every month. Many people don't know that they qualify for public benefits, and many people don't know what to do if they're declared ineligible for a benefit. But what we see time and time again is that there's a shame around needing these benefits. It's embarrassing for people to ask for help, and it can be even worse when the first answer they get is no. One of the truly great ways to lend your legal expertise to those that can't afford to pay is to help clients with a public benefits issue. It decreases the shame involved in asking for help and helps ensure that they receive the benefits for which they qualify. So with that said, we did bring 2 door prizes in the shape of 2 full representation cases that we do need help with at Legal Services. If you'd like to win one of those door prizes, all you need to do is talk to Catherine or I as you leave. One is a Social Security disability case, and one is a Medicaid waiver case. And we'd greatly appreciate any help and would be happy to talk to you about what we can do to help you take a case like that. So with that prize announcement, we've never given away prizes, so you're welcome. I'm going to turn it over to Elaine for the presentation. Thank you. I'll keep this and run it around.
Hi everyone, I'm Elaine Dahl, and as Angie said, this is a training. The focus of this training is actually going to be for pro bono attorneys who are helping people with non-public benefits cases to spot issues and to figure out what do you do if you have a client who mentions something like SNAP or SSI or something like that. But certainly if you are interested in developing a competency or doing pro bono work, MLSA would greatly appreciate that as well. So this is just the general caveats. This is only an hour. We're going to cover a lot of slides. The slides will be made available. MLSA will be emailing those out, so don't worry, you don't have to take notes or anything like that. And It's only an hour, it's not going to be comprehensive, and you're not going to be expected to be able to go to a fair hearing and help a client at the end of this. This is just basically an overview of what public benefits are and what issues you might see and what you do if you hear about an issue. So here's a pop quiz. You are advising CLEO client about a family law issue. As you talk, she says she just found out today she's going to get a lot less in food stamps and she doesn't know why. You should A, tell CLEO she needs to stop wasting your time talking about food stamps because you can only help with the family law issue. B, agree on the spot to give full representation to CLEO in relation to each and every issue she may have and then frantically research food stamps. Or C, tell CLEO you are only helping her with the family law issue but also get some basic information from her about the food stamp issue. And if it seems appropriate, tell her you will refer the benefits issue back to MLSA so they can decide how to proceed. What do y'all think? I'm hearing a C. Yay, the answer is C. And here are some reasons. We did a prior training on strategic and ethical approaches to pro bono work. And so as you're talking with a client about services that you're going to provide, so if you are thinking of taking on a public benefits issue, you need to check in with MLSA and just make sure that everybody's on the same page about what you're doing. Having a basic understanding of what CLEO is going through could help you with your case. So even if it's not something that's directly relevant to your case, you could be understanding that, hey, she's under a lot of stress, and maybe that's explaining some of her behavior in the family law issue that wouldn't be explained otherwise, or something along those lines. Yes, you should focus your advice appointment on the issue that you've been assigned, but you can help spot issues. And it's possible that there's a relationship between the food stamp issue and the family law issue. And so if you can get some more basic information, that can help you with your own case. So this is just a roadmap of the training. We're going to talk about some general observations about public benefits programs, things that apply to most or all programs. Then go through snapshots of different public benefit programs, and there will be a list of relevant resources with links after each snapshot. Suggest some questions you can ask if somebody does talk about their public benefits situation and how to proceed once you have that information, and what to do if you've got an overlapping issue. So some general observations. Financial eligibility. In general, an agency is going to review some combination of a person's countable resources or assets, countable income, and or family household or unit size. And so countable is in quotes because each program defines what they count and what they exclude differently. For purposes of this training, just assume when I'm talking about numbers that it's the countable numbers. Other eligibility factors may include whether they get other benefits, so they can be categorically eligible. If you qualify for SSI and that agency has already determined you qualify for SSI, you automatically are eligible for SNAP. That's just an example, so they don't reassess your eligibility. Work requirements, some of these have been around for a long time and some of them are new. In 2018, the president issued an executive order directing agency heads to consider either implementing new work requirements or strengthening work requirements for public benefits. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. Criminal record, it's not necessarily a bar to all programs, but especially felony drug convictions can be a bar to getting benefits. Your citizenship or immigration status, this is a very hot topic right now, complicated issue, but that can be a factor. Residency in the state where the benefits are issued, and this is because some of the programs allow the state's flexibility in how they administer the program, so you have to be in the state to know what applies to you. Your disability for some programs, prior incidents of basically misconduct if you violated rules or fraud. This is a hugely oversimplified list, but this is just factors that apply to most programs. Disclosure, there are disclosure requirements. When you apply, as Angie said, it's a pretty complicated form. I took poverty law in law school, and one of our assignments was to fill out one of these applications. You have to disclose a lot of information about your finances and update it regularly. Some programs are every 6 months, some are every year. And then in many programs, there are prohibitions on transferring assets within a look-back period. So oftentimes they'll say, if we go back and find out that you sold a car to your sister for less than market value, that's a violation. The potential consequences of failing to disclose include financial penalties, termination of benefits, it could be temporary or permanent, later having to pay back overpayments. I do want to say, though, that if a client is talking to you and saying that they are in an overpayment situation, it can happen for a variety of reasons, even if the government makes a mistake. If you're supposed to get $500 and they give you $600, they can pursue an overpayment. So if they're talking to you about an overpayment situation, it doesn't necessarily mean that they did anything wrong. And then criminal prosecution if it's really serious, if they've been conspiring with a medical provider for Medicaid fraud or something like that. So the important thing is if a client is telling you, hey, I'm thinking of not telling an agency about my income, that's not a good idea. They need to tell. The federal poverty level, a lot of programs look at income eligibility in relation to the federal poverty level, and just to give you a framework of where that is, $12,760 for a single person is the annual income for federal poverty level in 2020, $17,240 for a two-person family, and $26,200 for a four-person family. Tribal members or people on reservations, there are some specific programs for tribal members administered by the tribal government and or the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And there are also special rules about tribal members and or people who lived on certain reservations. So if you have a client in that category, just be aware that there could be different implications. And foster children, there are programs under what they call Title 4E funding that are specifically for foster children, or also special rules under other benefits programs. And finally, MontanaLawHelp.org. I did not include links to all of the resources in MontanaLawHelp.org, but if you are just looking for some basic information, that's a good place to start. So we're gonna go into the snapshots. I have to give huge disclaimers. I had to make some choices. These programs are very complicated, and I could either go down a bunny hole and give you a lot of details about one or two programs, or give you a quick overview of a bunch of them, and I decided to give you the quick overview of the bunch of them. Don't rely on these slides if you are advising a client, because it's more complicated than what I'm showing you here. And also this area of the law is subject to change pretty quickly. So I'm giving you links. They will work if you're accessing this later. Go to the slideshow view and they should be clickable if you're having trouble clicking in another view, slideshow view. And the final disclaimer is I'm not going into veteran or military benefits, and that's just mainly for time. Just be aware that the military and VA have a number of programs. You may hear about VA benefits or TRICARE, things like that. It's a different world, so just be aware of that. So the categories of snapshots for the different programs: healthcare, so Medicare, Medicaid and CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Programs, and in Montana that's called Healthy Montana Kids. Financial assistance, this is SSI, SSDI, TANF, block grants for child care scholarships, and LEAP, which is the Energy Assistance Program, food assistance, SNAP, which is sometimes called food stamps, and WIC, and then the HUD and USDA housing assistance programs. So we'll jump right into Medicaid and CHIP, which is one of the more complicated. What is it? It provides free or low-cost health coverage to people who are low income, over 65, blind, and or disabled. It's a big program. About 22% of the US population, 26% of Montana. About half of the recipients of Medicare, Medicaid and CHIP are children, so 51% in the US and 46% in Montana. For many recipients, the income level is 138% of the federal poverty level, but there are many categories of recipients in Medicaid, and so it can vary a lot. And there's a legislative report that I'm linking to in the next slide that shows just some examples of the different programs. There is no asset or resource test for several of the categories in Medicaid, but there are some categories that cap assets at $2,000 for an individual or $3,000 for a couple or a household of more than one. And that's a pretty common asset resource cap, the $2,000 for an individual or $3,000 for more. For work requirements, this is one of the newer ones. And so the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services left it to the states to say, you tell us what work requirements you want to implement. And in 2019, the legislature adopted community engagement requirements. 80 hours a month of work or work-related programs. It could be training, volunteering, or just straight work. They were supposed to be effective January 1st, but they are not yet federally approved. So the process is that the state has to send the statutes up to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for approval. And then once they approve that, then it has to come down, and then DPHHS will make rules to implement the program. So we're still at least a few months out on getting this implemented. And there is litigation going on that you may have heard about these work requirements in other states. I believe that a federal circuit court has just said that they're not consistent with the statutory framework and has blocked it in that circuit. And I think litigation in other circuits is working its way up. So you might have heard of Medicaid expansion, and this did greatly increase enrollment, including in Montana. This was something that was left to states, and Montana did do Medicaid expansion, meaning you can have a higher income and get Medicaid. That said, depending on income, you can be required to pay some things like parts of premiums, deductibles, and copays. And they're not terribly high, but if you have someone who's sick and doing a lot of copays, it can add up. So these are the resources, and I'm not going to go through these individually. I will just point out that DPHHS does have policy manuals that are often adopted and incorporated by reference in rule, and so they would have force of law. And those are sometimes a good place to start because you're seeing what the staff is looking at when they're making decisions or sending out notices. And then the other resources include statutes, regulations, and then the statistical resources. So we'll move on to Medicare. Medicare is healthcare coverage for people age 65 and older, certain people under 65 with disabilities, and the rule on that is you have to have the disability for at least 24 months before you're eligible for Medicare, and people with end-stage renal disease. It's another big program, about 19% of the US population, about 26% of Montana's population. We're a little older in Montana, so that makes some sense. There are no tests for Medicare, but you do pay higher premiums if your income is $87,000 or higher, which is not going to be a concern for MLSA clients. Medicare has parts, and so you may have heard of these parts before. Part A is hospital coverage, Part B is doctor and outpatient coverage, D is prescription drug coverage, and C is Medicare Advantage, and this is where private insurers can offer coverage programs. They typically wrap in dental and hearing and vision coverage in, and they may also include some Medigap insurance in those options, so they're pretty popular, the Part C options. Most people don't pay Part A premiums, but they do pay deductibles, coinsurance, and Part B and Part D premiums, and I think the Part B and Part D premiums are roughly $200 to $250 a month on average. Depends on which prescription drug coverage you want. If you're talking to a client who's around 65, there is an enrollment window. It's a 7-month window, 3 months before your birthday month, and 3 months after. And if you miss that window, there's a permanent surcharge on your Part B premiums. So you can ask a client, you can say, hey, have you enrolled for Medicare? And if they haven't, you can either point them to resources or send them back to MLSA for MLSA to point them to resources for how to apply. There is a donut hole. I did have a client when I was a staff attorney at MLSA who fell into the donut hole, and I had to consult with a public benefits attorney on this. It's basically a point where your prescription drugs are not covered. It's after a certain amount is covered and before you reach the out-of-pocket limits when then your coverage would resume. There are some discounts and extra help programs that can help with that, but it is a tricky situation for people. And there is, if you drop out of your Part D coverage and then you re-enroll after 2 months, there is a penalty. So if you have a client who's saying that they might drop out of it, might just be worth mentioning that. There are people dually enrolled in Medicare and Medicaid, about 4% of the population. How does that work? Well, you're basically on Medicaid and using some of your Medicaid coverage to pay your Medicare premiums by establishing a Medicare savings account. And there are different programs, but the biggest one is called Qualified Medicare Beneficiaries. And that will assist in paying your Medicare coverage. So this is for things where your Medicaid coverage doesn't cover all of your health needs. So if you have a client who says they're on both Medicare and Medicaid, that is definitely possible. These are, again, just the resources that were used. SSI is financial assistance for people with very limited income. It's not a very big program, 3% nationwide, 2% in Montana. So the deal with SSI is that the SSI benefit, the maximum you can get is $783 for an individual or $1,185 for a couple. If you have countable income under that amount, you get the difference. So if you're an individual and you make $500 in a part-time job, you would get $283 a month. There is a resource cap of $2,000 for an individual or $3,000 for a couple. I did want to note that there is something called an ABLE account, and this is basically just recognizing that people with disabilities often have needs that are expensive, things like adaptive technologies or things like that. So if you're diagnosed with a disability before age 26, you can go to a participating financial institution and open an ABLE account and use that money to buy things like adaptive technologies. There are work incentives for both SSI and SSDI. It's called Ticket to Work, but they are not requirements. The incentives are that you get to keep more money. So you get to have your income plus your SSI or your SSDI up to a certain limit, at which point they'll kick you off the program. They're not requirements, but if you hear somebody who says, I'm on disability and I have a job, yes, that is possible, and it is actually encouraged by the federal government. The national SSI monthly benefit was $565 in 2019. There is a state supplement, and in Montana, it's between $26 and $94. It only goes to about 800 people, and they are people in group homes and situations like that. Just a terminology thing, there is SSI, which is supplementary security income, SSDI, which is for disabilities, and OASDI is the program that most retirees are on with Social Security. They're all administered by the Social Security Administration, and you might hear somebody call them all Social Security, but they are 3 separate programs, and you can get more than one of those programs at once. Again, these are just the resources. So SSDI is for people who have a disability and have worked long enough and paid their Social Security taxes. So when you look at your pay stub or your W-2, you'll see your Medicare taxes, your Social Security taxes. This is something that you have to pay into and get your work credits to get the benefit. There are about 3% of the population on SSDI. The Social Security Administration website says Montana is 4.5%, but I couldn't make it work. I just put these numbers up here. They're saying the population is 634,000, and I don't know where they're getting that number. I couldn't figure it out. So it's 3% if you say that the population is around 1 million. There is no income limit, but you have to have those work credits showing you've paid into the system. There is no resource limit, and that same Ticket to Work program applies to incentivize work for SSDI. The major factor here is determining a disability. Most people are denied the first time that they apply for disability. You have to show that you're unable to work for over a year because of a disability. The average benefit is $1,235, but it depends on the work credits. In Montana, the people who are looking at disability applications, it's the Montana Disability Determination Services Bureau of DPHHS. If someone's denied, they can request that that bureau reconsider the denial, or they can appeal to the Office of Hearings, Operations, and Billings. And one of the work incentives is that you don't have to recertify your disability as often. So for people who may feel like their disability determination was hard fought or hard won, they might be incentivized to do that work program for that reason. Again, these are the resources. So TANF is the next program. This is a program that you may still hear some people refer to as welfare. It is a financial assistance program for families, so you have to have a child or a pregnant person. And the idea is to promote work and marriage and to end the dependency of needy parents. And so for those of you who remember the 80s and 90s, and you might remember hearing talk about the welfare queens who were having multiple children out of wedlock. That was a common thread of discourse at that time. This is a reaction to that, so there are requirements for this. Benefits are provided on an electronic benefits transfer card. It's very similar to a debit card. It's only about 1% of the population on this program. It's a very small program. Income requirement is $1,092 a month for a family of 3 or $1,317 for a family of 4. It is tied to the 2011 federal poverty level, and I tried to figure out why that is, and I don't know why, but it is. And the resource asset limit is $3,000 for the family. Yes, there is a work requirement. Basically, you get an individualized plan. There are TANF pathways offices that develop a plan for you saying you're gonna go to this training program, you're gonna apply for these jobs, that sort of thing. You cannot get both TANF and SSI at the same time. It is possible for the kids in a family to be on TANF and the adults not to be. So they might be on the parents might be on SSI and the kids might be on TANF. And you can only get 60 months of TANF benefits in your lifetime, so 5 years, and then you're kicked off unless the state approves an extension. In Montana, they don't count the time that you receive benefits if you're an adult on certain reservations or the time that you're a kid. So in other states, they'll say if you got 5 years of benefits as a kid, you can't get any more as an adult. In Montana, they don't count your childhood time. So is anybody feeling like this is overwhelming so far? Just hands? Yeah, I'm seeing some nodding. I just want to point out that, again, I'm not going into nitty-gritty details here, and if you can think that this is overwhelming for you, just imagine a client who is dealing with it and maybe has an 8th grade education and is widowed and they're trying to deal with these things. So you are definitely in a better position than they are to deal with these programs. Again, these are just the resources for the program. LEAP, this is energy assistance, and so it can help people pay their energy bills. It can also offer weatherization services, so things like insulation. It's a pretty small program, 1.7% of the US population. I didn't find numbers for Montana, but I'm gonna guess just based on other programs, we're probably pretty consistent with that. The income limits, I don't know why this is, but it's tied to state median income for households of 8 or less, so 60% of the state median income. If your household is 9 or more, it's 150% of the federal poverty level. Weatherization income limits are generally higher, just encouraging more efficiency. The resource limits are $11,610 for a household of 1 or $19,746 for a household of 4. There is no work requirement. You can apply for assistance basically during the winter months of each year. You can apply for weatherization assistance anytime. You can apply either as a homeowner or as a renter, and I believe that's just tied to who's actually paying the energy bills. And there are priority groups. There isn't enough money in this program for everybody who qualifies, so they prioritize certain people over others. You may have also heard of Energy Share. That is a nonprofit that is partially funded through USB funds, so those are ratepayer funds administered by energy providers. Energy Share can give services to people who are beyond the LEAP qualifications. So they're 2 separate programs, but they can complement each other. Again, there's just the resources. And childcare. So Best Beginnings scholarships, this is what they're called in Montana. They can help low-income families pay for childcare on a sliding scale. It's a small program, 0.4% of the population. So the income limit is 150% of federal poverty level, or you're on TANF. If you are already receiving assistance, so you already qualified under that 150%, you can continue up to 12 months so long as you're 185% or less. And the next slide, I'll show you a chart that'll maybe help make that make more sense. The asset limit is $1 million, and I had to double check that, but it's true. It's $1 million. And the work requirement is 60 hours per month per parent, or if you're a full-time student or a part-time student working 40 hours a month. If you've got 2 parents in the household, the work requirement is 120 hours a month for both parents, and that can be divvied up however the parents decide. Child care resource and referral programs administer these. So in Helena, Child Care Connections is the CCR&R. In Butte, it's 4Cs. There are different programs around the state. The child has to be up to age 12 or have special needs or be under the supervision of a court and under 18. The care has to be provided by a licensed child care center or home or by a family friend and neighbor, and that's provider, and that's a definition in the program. There are copays ranging from 1% to 21% with minimums of a certain amount. So this chart is, I know you can't read the numbers, but just to give you an idea, the standard eligibility is the up to 150%, and so it's going by the family size and the income level, and you just find where you are on the chart, and I have a link to that in the resources. Once you're on the program, at that 150% level, if you get a raise and it takes you up to, say, 170% of the federal poverty level, they're not just going to say, oh, now you're responsible for all of your child care costs. You have a graduated eligibility, so you're kind of stepping down as your income improves. And that is in Montana. It's not true in every state. Some states will kick you off once you're at 151%. So these are those resources. That sliding fee scale is the second resource listed. So SNAP, this is a nutrition benefit program. It is administered by the USDA on the federal level, and it is to purchase healthy food and move towards self-sufficiency. If you look at the federal statutes, they also mention that it will help the agricultural economy to have this program. Benefits are usually on an EBT card, again, like a debit card. And there are food distribution programs in some areas, and those generally have tighter income and resource requirements. It's about 10% of the population, both federally and statewide, are on SNAP. The income limit is 200% of federal poverty level. Assets are $3,500 if you have an elderly or disabled person in the unit, or $2,250 for all other households. Work requirements, yes, there are 2 sets of work requirements for SNAP. One is for people ages 16 to 59, and it's basically saying you have to register for work, participate in programs, and take a suitable job if offered. If you have a violation of this, the first time you're suspended from the program for a month, the second time can be permanently disqualifying. There's also this ABOD program, able-bodied adults without dependents. So if you're 18 to 49 without dependents, you have to work or participate in a work program for 80 hours a month to receive more than 3 benefits in 3 years. But Montana got a waiver and has gotten waivers in the past for 38 counties and 7 reservations. So this one would just depend on where your client is living. One thing just to note about SNAP is that you don't have to be family members to be considered a household. So if you have a roommate and you're sharing your food costs, you are considered one unit, whether you're related or not. If you live together but you buy your food separately, you're 2 separate units. Average benefit nationwide is $130 a month for an individual, $240 for a household, a unit. SNAP, there are limits on what you can buy with it. You can't buy hot or prepared food, cleaning supplies, hygiene products, or medicines. Again, these are just the resources. WIC. WIC is for supplemental foods, healthcare referrals, and nutrition education for low-income, pregnant, breastfeeding, and non-breastfeeding postpartum women, and to infants and children up to age 5 who are found to be at nutritional risk. And so these are, again, primarily provided through the EBT cards, but there are also food packages, and the screenings, education, and services are also provided. It's about 2% of the population, both nationally and statewide. 185% of federal poverty level is the limit. The state could have actually set a lower income level, but Montana did not. Montana stayed with the federal. no asset limits, no work requirement, but you have to have a health professional say you're at nutritional risk. So what does that mean? Are you anemic? Do you not have enough food for the kid to be maintaining healthy weight? That sort of thing. You have to get that certification from a health professional. WIC vendors have to agree to comply with WIC requirements. So you might see when you walk through the grocery store, you might see little WIC signs next to the price of an item, and that means you're at a store that is a WIC vendor. There is a program for farmers to accept WIC at farmers markets. And then, again, this is limited. You can't just buy any kind of food with WIC. It's basically formula, milk, cheese, eggs. There's a little bit of fruit and vegetables and juice and grains and legumes and fish. It depends on which population you are, and there are many charts about who's eligible for what. So again, these are the links to resources. And housing, and this is the last one that we're going to go through, yay. So HUD and USDA both administer housing programs, which include vouchers and public housing. There are also specific programs incentivizing development and rental of multi-unit housing for elderly and disabled people. So basically the idea of that is the federal government will say to a developer, if you'll build a multi-unit property for older people or for disabled people, then we're going to help subsidize the rent that they get. And so that's going to give you basically a guaranteed income stream. So these programs, it's about 3% of the population, both nationally and statewide. This is one where it's not tied to the federal poverty level, it's tied to area median income. And I believe that's just because housing costs tend to fluctuate from area to area, depending on the income levels of an area. If you get into the world of HUD, you'll see very low and low levels. You'll also see moderate for other things, but most of these programs require that you're at 30% or 50% of area median income to qualify. No asset limit. This is kind of an odd thing. If your family's assets are over $5,000, they're going to either count your income that is derived from those assets, or they're going to count a passbook rate of interest and count that toward your income. So HUD incentivizes, this is similar to the Ticket to Work, but doesn't require local agencies to adopt moving to work. It's not in Montana yet. Basically, HUD is saying to the local agencies that if you do this, you can get a little bit more money and not as much administrative requirements, and that's a fairly big thing with HUD. HUD is, I think it's fair to say, a pretty complicated agency that has a lot of detail to it. In Montana, we haven't adopted that yet. I think it's one of those things that it makes more sense for the higher population programs to adopt than in Montana. This is another one of those benefits where there just aren't enough benefits for the number of people who qualify, so there are very long waiting lists. And there are also, depending on the locality, there can be priorities or preferences for different types of people in different situations to get moved up on the list. People who get these benefits generally are paying 30% of their adjusted gross income toward their rent. In Montana, the Montana Department of Commerce administers these programs and contracts with local agencies. These are the resources for this. I will just note for the statistics, HUD actually doesn't release their statistics, so I am relying on a nonprofit that had an agreement with HUD for the statistics on that. So what do you do when you have a client who mentions a public benefits issue? Well, here are some examples of things that you might hear. You might hear a client who says, I just don't understand what's going on with my benefits. I just need some help understanding. Or I might be eligible for benefits, but I don't know how to apply for them. Or I have just been told that I am not eligible for benefits or that my benefits are being reduced, and I don't agree with that. Or it might be an overlapping issue with your case. And finally, it could be a scam. And I'm just going to take a minute to talk about scams because this is one of the things that just personally I don't understand it. But a lot of scammers target low-income people, and they are trying to either get their money or their personally identifying information or both. I mean, I understand it on an intellectual level in that a lot of low-income people are easy targets, but obviously they don't have a lot of resources. But scammers tend to either try to sound governmental, so they'll make up names for themselves and use sort of official-looking seals. And they'll use under penalty of law language, like they'll say things like, you know, under penalty of law, manipulating with this letter is, you know, you could be in prison for this. And they're just talking about mail fraud law, but they're trying to basically make people think that they have more power than they do. Other times scammers will pretend to be helpers, and I'm not saying every organization that helps people with public benefits is a scammer, but if they're charging high fees and to help somebody get a higher benefit payment or appeal their Social Security denial, it might be a red flag. So things that your client might say, you know, let's say that you're trying to negotiate a settlement and the client says, I can't pay for it because I'm saving up $300 to reapply for Medicaid. Well, does that sound right, that somebody's paying a $300 application fee for Medicaid? Probably not. So that's a red flag. Or I'm selling my food stamps to an organization so that I can pay the adverse in your case. That's illegal. You can't sell your food stamps. So just those kinds of things are things to look out for. There are government agencies that actually list scams that they're aware of. USDA has a pretty long list. Office of Consumer Protection does a good job of it in Montana. So if you hear something and you're thinking, that doesn't sound right, you could check those. Ultimately, bottom line, if you're hearing something and it's just in your gut sounding weird, refer it to MLSA and let them take a look at it and see how they want to proceed. So these are just questions you can ask. If a benefits issue comes up, you can just be like, are you having trouble understanding something? What is it? Do you think something was done wrong? Have you told MLSA about this? And this is a pretty big deal. If MLSA has already addressed it, obviously they have handled it, but assume that they didn't. You can just get some details that you can use in deciding whether to refer it back to MLSA or not. So just getting clarification on which program it is, when it happened, whether the client has actually tried to communicate with the agency yet, whether they have a separate caseworker who has weighed in, whether they think it has something to do with your case. And you know, I have said this before, I think clients know more about their lives than an attorney ever can. So the client may well be thinking there's a connection to your case, but if you don't ask it, they may not volunteer it. And then just, do you have paperwork? So things that you can stop and not do anything further on. If the client is saying, I think my benefits are right, they're just not enough, they could be right, but there's not a whole lot you or MLSA can do about that. If MLSA already told them, we can't help you, or they've already given all the services that they're going to do, and you don't have any new information, that's probably the end of it. For a client who has a caseworker, a lot of clients with disabilities have caseworkers, if they're working with a nonprofit, who are advocating for them. That caseworker might be successful. They might call or write letters and address the issue, so then MLSA doesn't have to get involved. Or if the issue was a long time ago, and just use your common sense. If it was 10 years ago, it's probably not likely you can do much. If it was 3 months ago, maybe. And if you're not sure, you can always refer it to MLSA. Don't promise anything. So if you are thinking, yes, this client needs further services, and either you're thinking of doing it or you're thinking MLSA should provide someone else, again, just you and MLSA need to be on the same page about what's going on. So just what you can tell the client is, I'm helping you with a different issue today, but I'll tell MLSA about your question, and MLSA needs to be involved. Sometimes clients are persistent, and so you can be a little bit firmer, and this is just a script that you could use to be a little bit firmer and refer them back to the MLSA helpline. So what will MLSA do? MLSA will assign an intake worker to follow up, basically, and find out if there's more information needed, or they'll just tell the client MLSA has determined it can't assist. Once MLSA has triaged the case, they could refer it to an MLSA staff attorney, to a private attorney. It could be a pro bono attorney or just a private bar attorney. For Social Security disability appeals in particular, there are attorneys out there who do those cases for a fee or a percentage, or to another agency or an organization if they just need help applying for benefits. And so they can close the case as referral, advice, brief services, or of a higher level of case closure if they're negotiating or actually taking it to a fair hearing or to court. So overlapping issues. The biggest overlap that could happen is if there's going to be a change in income and obligations. So if you're doing a family law case, or it could also be a change in resources or family or household size, and the household's going to be split, or there's going to be a support issue, or an income difference that's resulting from that divorce, it could be an overlapping issue for that purpose, or for another financial issue if you have a financial issue in a different kind of case. And the programs vary in how different aspects of these changes will affect eligibility for these programs. Again, disclosures, just like you have to disclose things to the court, especially in family law, there can be adverse consequences if you don't disclose things to an agency. And settlements, this is something I tried to find a resource that would just very quickly and concisely say, here's what you do with different benefits if you're dealing with a settlement situation. The closest thing I found was from the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii from 2008. It's obviously not current, but it could be a starting point. And it really does depend on which program you're talking about, how much money you're talking about, and whether the person should say, I'm gonna take a break from this benefit and then reapply after I've maybe spent down my settlement, or maybe I'm just gonna take a hit with this particular program, knowing that it's gonna reduce my benefits over time. It really does depend. So, if you think there's an overlapping issue, here are some things that you can do. See if you can find the answer, if it's simple. So here's an example of something that might be simple. Client hands you a notice that says, DPHHS is saying, pursuant to administrative rule of Montana, whatever number, you are being disenrolled from program X and enrolled in program Y. And we'll follow up with further information. Could you all look up regulation and maybe the surrounding regulations and the authorizing and implementing statutes and get an idea of what those programs are? As you sit here today, do you think you're capable of doing that? I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, so yes. So you could look that up, and maybe it's just an administrative change that has no effect for the client, or maybe it's something really clear that there's a chart in one of the regulations that says, if you were on this program and now you're on this program, you're gonna lose $50 a month. And maybe it's just a really straightforward thing. If you're doing that, I would still tell MLSA what you told the client, because MLSA might be looking at it more on a statewide or systemic basis, and they might be tracking that they think either that regulation isn't legal or constitutional, or maybe it's being applied unfairly to women age 40 and above or something like that. So it's still worth telling MLSA. But if you can resolve things like that, and it's not gonna take you very much time, I know MLSA would really appreciate it if you did that. You can consult with MLSA. If it's more complicated, you can say, hey, can you put me in touch with somebody with more experience in this, and consult with me about what to do next. And or just refer it to them and say, I think this is a separate issue, and it is an overlapping issue with my case, but I'd like to coordinate with whoever is going to be helping with that public benefits issue. And finally, you can develop a competency. So if you're doing a lot of these cases and you just keep running into public benefits issues and you want to become better at it, talk to Angie or Catherine or whoever else, anyone, Angie is saying anyone at MLSA, and see, are there opportunities to train or get support from a mentor, and if you're interested in doing it. You're certainly not required to, but if you're interested in doing it, that's another pathway. And so I have the contact information. I think Angie said her email at the beginning of this, but that is Angie's email, or you can always click volunteer at tlsa.org. And so we have 5 minutes, so if there are any questions or comments.
I've got one that came in over email, and we may need to, sorry, stand back up. May need to actually look it up because I'm not sure. So it says there's $3,500 elderly or disabled person cap on assets in unit. You mean if someone owns a car worth more than $3,500, you can't get SNAP?
So I would have to for all of these, I would have to double check everything, but my instinct is telling me that a vehicle would likely be an excluded thing, so with that countable income, I would want to double check on SNAP, but typically there's something that would allow for just a regular vehicle.
I don't know the answer to that either, and for the person that asked that, we will look it up and respond to that, but Legal Services looks at assets in much the same way as many of the public benefits programs do, and cars are dealt with in a very particular way. So my guess is that it's a complicated answer. Other questions? I have a few things to point out, but are there questions I can run this microphone around to? Okay. I did want to just give a quick, it's very, very, very overwhelming, and it's a lot of information, and it's a lot of calculations that are based on different statutes that no one really seems to know where people get them from, but that's how it's always been. So Legal Services tries to deal with some of the more complicated programs itself. We specialize in federally subsidized housing. Those are the types of landlord-tenant cases we are taking because it's a very specific set of rules. But what we ask our pro bono attorneys to do, and why we want to make sure that everybody is aware of all of the different moving pieces in public benefits, is because often, even if you're at a family law clinic, you may hear something like, well, I need to put in more spousal support because I can't afford the food. I can't afford to eat. That's a public benefits issue, right? If they're not on SNAP, that's something that we can make sure they get connected with. Public benefits issues can masquerade in other civil legal issues really interestingly. I think it's interesting. For example, we have clients that call, older clients a lot, that call and say, I need to divorce my spouse of a long time. I don't want to get divorced, but I have to. And when we do a little bit more deep digging, it's because they don't qualify for benefits when they're married, but if they were divorced, they would qualify for the benefits. They need to get medical care or supplemental income. So we see that happen. We see people apply for help saying they need a child support order, but they've never met, they don't have any contact with the biological parents or something like that. What they're actually trying to do is get TANF, and TANF is requiring that they have done that. We get clients that call and say, I'm being evicted. I just got all these updates done to my rental, and my landlord's booting me out. It's so weird. Sometimes some landlords will allow LEAP to come in and make those upgrades and then perhaps re-rent the unit. So there are lots of different things that kind of trigger a public benefits flag, and we would encourage you to keep an eye out for that, but we're also looking too. So if you have a question as you're talking to someone, or you think that, this is more of a I don't have enough money piece of a legal issue, sometimes public benefits is a solution, and we can help people get connected. So all to say, it's very overwhelming, but just knowing what programs exist and the rules around those can be helpful in identifying cases or issues that come up in other forms. I was hoping I could make that take a few more minutes so we didn't end early, so we can say we took the full hour for the CLE, but does anybody have any other questions? I'm going to do a quick check of my email. Anything? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and huge thank you to Elaine. This is, I assume, not exactly super fun stuff to research and put on a slide, so we really appreciate it. Thank you all.